Melbourne, as Jill indicated. I'm a software-defined data center practice director here with Summit Technology Group. We will be talking through the ransomware landscape this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about the actual landscape that we live in, the threat landscape as it is, how it's evolving. We're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to protect yourself. Very specifically, we're going to be talking about the need for ransomware recovery. So there's obviously a proactive element, and we are going to talk about that a little bit. But really the focus of this presentation is going to be about the recovery aspect. So what do I do? I've been hit, and how do I recover from that? So we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to protect yourself. And then we're going to talk specifically about a set of tools that VMware has provided, VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery plus ransomware. Which is, we feel, a very compelling offering for protecting your VMware environments against the threat of ransomware. And then we're going to have a bit of a call to action at the end. As we're going through this, I'm going to call out, there's a couple things that I'm going to call out up front, and then I'm going to provide some links to at the end. One, as we're going through this, if there's anything that resonates with you, whether it's specific to this or when I do a little bit of an introduction to Summit, specific to our service offerings that you are interested in having a discussion with us about, at the beginning of this presentation, which we will share out after the presentation, you notice we've got email addresses for myself and Jill. Happy to answer any emails that you guys want to send to us. We also will share some links for filling out a web form that will provide also another way to have someone from Summit reach out and contact you. The final thing, and I think this is probably one of the most important things, is VMware and a company called Capometrics worked together, and Summit partnered with VMware to provide a ransomware recovery readiness assessment. It's a fairly short series of questions. When I say fairly short, it'll probably take you 20 to 30 minutes to answer the survey's questions thoughtfully. At the end of that survey, it will provide you a PowerPoint deck, essentially, that will give you information and give you an assessment of where your organization sits in a from a readiness perspective when it comes to ransomware recovery. And so I'll provide the link to that at the end of the presentation, but just wanted to call that out because those are some important things that in our call to action that we're going to want to hit on. So a little bit about Summit itself. So Summit Technology Group, we are headquartered out of the central Pennsylvania area, so Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg area. We have offices in Alabama as well as offices in Canada, and we have a large dev and operations center outside of Delhi, India. Our services offerings themselves really break down, if you were to break it down into kind of 6 distinct businesses. So we've got data center and cloud solutions. So think about helping customers modernize their data center, modernize their operations. For the customers that are doing hybrid cloud or looking to shift workloads into public cloud, working with them on solutions around that. We have a networking and security group of offerings. Sounds like what it is. It's very much software defined. We focus on SD-WAN solutions. We also do traditional networking. We do security consulting, as well as we've partnered with a number of organizations such as Arctic Wolf to talk through SOC and various different security offerings. We offer a set of collaboration solutions. So think about MSP offerings around things like Office 365, Ring Central, those sorts of things, your typical knowledge worker sort of engagements. We offer strategic and operational staff augmentation. So what we're talking about there, we offer managed services retainers with technical account management. We also do time and material-based engagements as well as project-based engagements, which are fixed scope and price depending on what your needs are. We have a very large application and development line of business where we actually do a lot of cloud native application development. Our largest customer there is actually the U.S. federal government, but we also work with a number of other organizations, helping them actually rewrite and or do greenfield code application for cloud native. And then finally, we have an advanced consulting arm. So we offer virtual CIO practice, where we actually augment CIO, the actual physical CIO on site with organizations, and we do some advanced consulting as well, really targeted towards the financial markets around IT operations for community banking and lenders. So if any of that has struck a chord with you and you'd be interested in conversing with us about it, you'll see the link at the bottom of this slide. It'll be also at the end of this presentation. Feel free to fill out one of those forms and we will get back with you. So now let's get into the meat of our conversation. So we're talking about ransomware. That's really the whole idea of this discussion, is let's talk about the landscape. Let's understand, where we're vulnerable and what the threat landscape actually is. So based on a survey that was done by Sophos this past year, so they were looking at 2022, so it was a 2023 survey. 2/3 of the organizations that were in this survey were actually hit with a ransomware attack in 2022. So that doesn't necessarily mean they were encrypted, but they were actually, there was an attack that was detected. However, of those customers, 76% of them actually had an encryption event. So they not only were attacked, but they were actually had data encrypted prior to them being able to quarantine, prior to them being able to clean it up. If you think about it, we talk an awful lot in the security world about these preventative measures, and there's a lot, and we'll get into it here in a little bit, around AI, ML, advanced techniques for detecting malware and really preventing that attacker from getting into your systems before they get in. But at the end of the day, this was a survey that was only this past year, and 2/3 of the people that were attacked, or I'm sorry, 3/4 of the people that were actually attacked, the attacks were successful. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is and what that actually means when it comes to our preparedness for ransomware attacks. So as we mentioned, these 2/3 of these organizations that were surveyed had been attacked, 76 had data encrypted. This is really something that is unique in the IT world, in that there's something going on in IT, something very specific in IT that has really bubbled up to the C-suite, and not just the CIO, CTO, but CEOs are starting to take notice of this threat and looking to understand, one, the threat and how to prevent against it, and how to prevent specifically against the business impacts that this poses. And the reason for this is, one, the sheer volumes of the attacks, but two, when we have one of these successful attacks, customers sometimes will pay the ransom. Actually, it's actually about a 50-50 split from what I've seen. Customers will pay the ransom, and in the same survey that we were referencing earlier, 96% of those that said they paid the ransom did not regain full access to their data. And that is a significant talking point. That, a lot of times we'll have discussions around, well, if I'm an attacker and they pay me the ransom, I'm going to want to have, them be able to unencrypt their data, because the next time I attack somebody, I want to be known as a good attacker that will give you your money back if you pay me. Well, we're dealing with unscrupulous people here. They honestly do not care whether or not you get your data back. They just want the money on the back end. So the assumption cannot be made that if I get hit, if I pay the ransom, and they're usually exorbitant, but if I pay that ransom, that I'll get my data back, because more likely than not, significantly more likely than not, you will not regain full access to that data. You might get some of it, you might get none of it. The average cost of a breach worldwide is $4.6 million. When we talk about $4.6 million, that's the cost of lost business at present, the cost of the labor hours to get things back up and running, the cost of, kind of all the things that go into ransomware recovery and the outage itself. You'll see here in a moment that, honestly, we think that that's the tip of the iceberg. That is a very point in time cost that doesn't encompass all of the soft costs that go along with one of these attacks. And just to wrap this slide up, in 2021, the average, or the worldwide damages from ransomware was approximately $20 billion. The projection for 2024 is somewhere around $42 billion. So, in a matter of 3 years, you're seeing more than a double the projected damages from ransomware. And honestly, that may well be an underestimate as well. But when you're thinking about the damages done from a ransomware event, it's not just the time that you're down. That you're impacted. So this is a real life scenario. This is a workshop that we did in conjunction with one of our customers, and they were a bank. They are a bank, and we started working through kind of some of the what if scenarios with them. So not just, hey, I'm down and I might lose people coming to my website, or hey, I'm down and I might just lose some of the traffic that would get me new business, on the days that I'm down. But we started talking through, what is this going to mean for your deposit base? So if you have a ransomware event and for some reason or other your systems are down and people can't see their money, get their money, they can't access their financial records, what do you think the impact of that is going to be? How many of these customers, when you're back up and running, are going to say, hey, I don't trust you with my money anymore. We're going to walk away and go to one of your competitors. And then not only that, what does it look like from your growth projections? So if you've got acquisitions that you're looking to make, if you're looking at more strategic partnerships, what do you think that a ransomware event that is a particularly bad one, what's that going to look like from a projected growth perspective for you? How do you think that will impact your projected growth? And by the time we'd worked this all out, and we kind of worked through them and said, if you had a 16-day outage, so that was kind of what we based it on, which is about the average time in the industry today for restoring completely from a ransomware attack. And I'll throw a caveat, that's restoring. That's not doing all of my forensics, trying to figure out how did it get in, what all did it touch. That's just operations back up and running. The industry average is about 16 days. The impact that we came up with over a several year span was about $274 million that they felt that it would, between lost deposits, between impact to future revenue, regulatory fines potentially, right? So if you have one of these events and I'm in a regulated industry, I'm probably going to have to report. If I haven't done due diligence on my side to make sure that I can have adequately protected myself and provided the ability to recover, there's likely to be regulatory fines and things like that. So that $4.6 million is really a drop in the bucket compared to what the actual number probably is. So that's kind of a little bit around the landscape as far as what's out there and the potential impact to your business. Let's talk a little bit about the threat from a technology perspective. So we really saw a paradigm shift in the 2016 to 2017 timeframe. Prior to 2017, most of the malware that we saw, ransomware or otherwise, tended to be file-based. So if you've been in the industry for a while, things like Torrent Locker, sometimes called Crypto Locker, or Cerber, they were file-based attacks. If you go a little bit further back in the non-ransomware world, going back, and I'm going to date myself here for a minute, to the early 2000s, you think about, some of the malware, Code Red, Nimda, SQL Slammer, some of those early malware that were file-based. We've actually developed a pretty good way of dealing with that in traditional antivirus, right? So it's all file-based. It works on file signatures. I can use the file signatures, one, to protect myself. So if I see a file trying to be installed on one of my machines and I'm running up-to-date antivirus software, it will prevent it from happening. If I have it on my machine and I update my antivirus software, I can usually find it and clean it up. Within reason, right? So one of the things we have to understand here is, from a protection perspective, we are always a step or two behind the folks that are trying to get in. They're always looking for new ways to knock on the door. And sometimes we can predict those ways and sometimes we can't. But by and large, prior to 2017, this was a sufficient way to protect ourselves. Starting around 2017 and moving into the present, we're really starting to see more and more of what we consider fileless or living off the land malware. So these are things that are in-memory programs. Sometimes they are injected into OS files. So the actual libraries that your operating systems, your applications are running off of, they have been known to be breached. So from an AV perspective, it looks an awful lot like, or it looks exactly like what I would expect to see. So I ignore it. We see a lot of that. And then there's always the stolen credentials, right? So, folks that have had their credentials, whether it's through a phishing attempt or whether it's through carelessness, or whether it's through another side door hack or something like that. Stolen credentials are readily available for many organizations out on the dark web. So there's always that piece to it too. It's very hard to predict against something like that. And one of the hallmarks of these sorts of attacks, not only are they very hard to detect, but even if you have the right software in place to detect them, the very first thing they're going to do is go out and do their best to disable that security software. So those are some of the things that we're up against here. So what we're seeing from a technology perspective is the tools that are being used to attack, the methodologies being used to attack are actually getting more and more complex. So they're harder and harder to defend against. So you might think to yourself, well, that's great. But if it's more, if the technology is more and more advanced, it's probably harder and harder to use. So it's probably a smaller subset of people that are able to use this. Well, not so fast. So we've also seen, in conjunction with the advancements in technology, the advancements in the business side of ransomware. So ransomware as a service has actually started to pop up. And we're actually seeing, due to the large amount of money that is out there to be made off of encrypting people's data, some of there have been crime syndicates, there have been, as well as governments and things like that are actually offering ransomware as a service. And when I mean ransomware as a service, I mean it as just like you would, go up and subscribe to a software as a service offering from a Microsoft or an Amazon or somebody like that. You can go out and subscribe to one of these services. You pay a monthly fee. In a lot of cases, they'll have help desk. You get access to people that will help you run the code, people that will help you customize the code to meet your desired requirements. And it's really run as a business. So honestly, if you are one of these people that is looking to benefit from being a purveyor of ransomware, you don't have to be all that technical any longer. That's not to say you don't have to be technical at all, but you've got help now. And you can pay a couple $100s a month, and I've got a help desk at my hand. If what I'm trying to do doesn't work, I'll call the help desk and they'll help me get it done. So we're really living in a really weird time where it's the skill set required to attack somebody with ransomware is going down. The tooling and the methodology is going up. So what do I do? Well, you've often heard the phrase, I'm sure, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But what happens when a pound of prevention isn't really enough? And that really is when we start talking about the protection schemes and things like that. How do I recover? Because remember, of the people that get hit, some 76% of them actually experience an encryption event. Well, the way we've always dealt with security in the past for these sorts of things, we've kind of taken a three-pronged approach. You've got people, you've got process, and you've got technology. And if any of you have been to any of the security webinars and things like that over the past decade or two, you've probably heard that three-tiered approach. From a process and technology perspective, we've actually done a pretty good job. You're seeing a lot of advanced antivirus protection and things like that are based on AI and ML learning algorithms. There's been a lot of advancements in firewalls. You think about SD-WAN with some of the SASE, which is the secure access, secure edge offerings out there. You've got advanced microsegmentation of networking. So, hey, maybe I've got scenarios where if something does get in, I can seal it off very quickly, so it limits my exposure. I've got zero or so security as a service offerings. You think about offerings like Arctic Wolf, who offers SOC as a service and things like that. That's all great. Zero trust models for my applications. It's wonderful. But at the end of the day, your weak spot in your organization is still your people. I mentioned a couple of slides ago where stolen credentials is one of the big attack vectors. Well, phishing is still phishing. There's a lot of social engineering that goes into this. Human error. One of the organizations that I used to work for, as part of their pen testing every year, would actually scatter USB fobs out in the parking lot just to see who would pick them up and plug them in. It was a better than 50% hit rate, and it wasn't just the non-technical, non-skilled people. It was people that were director level and up. So you've got a vice president that plugs in a USB fob that's infected. Boom, I got you. And then there's always the threat of disgruntled employees. It's probably a little bit smaller than these other threats, but it's always out there. So until we come up with, a patch to create people 2.0, that's my AIML presentation. Until we come up with a people 2.0, we're going to be dealing with these sorts of things. So it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And how do I prepare myself for that? Well, when we start thinking about the way we've always done high availability disaster recovery, backup recovery type planning, the focus has really been around the physical, right? So you think about, I've got a data center outage, something happens, a backhoe cuts a power line, data center goes dead, network interruptions, maybe I've got a disk cluster that fails, I get some data corruption, how do I recover from that? The concept of a smoking hole scenario. Honestly, there have been two of those. I've been doing this for about 25 years. I can count on two fingers the customers that I've worked directly with, and it's been a lot of customers that have had smoking hole scenarios. One was on 9/11, and the other one was a massive fire in a data center in Northern Virginia. That's it. 2 and 25 years, and we're probably talking thousands of customers. That's not a huge hit rate. However, I talk daily to people now that are dealing with the impact of ransomware, dealing with the impact of malware in their environments. We've architected our HADR historically from a recovery time objective and a recovery point objective perspective. What's the quickest I can recover, and what's the most recent copy of the data that I can recover from. In a traditional sense, usually you're looking for minutes, if not maybe an hour or two, right? So I want a recovery time objective in a lot of cases. I want to be back up and running in an hour, or 4 hours if you stretch it, depending on the systems. Recovery point objective, sometimes I want minutes. In a ransomware scenario, you're honestly talking weeks and days. You're not talking minutes and hours any longer. So the things that you can do to enable yourself to recover more quickly in those scenarios can be hugely impactful. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. And honestly, the things that we have traditionally architected these things for, they're not the biggest risk to your business. The biggest risk is the bad actor, is malware. We see 40% or more of the cause of outages in data centers right now are coming due to malware. It's not the physical. So when we talk about ransomware recovery versus disaster recovery, they're really two different things. I almost would say that ransomware recovery is a superset that includes some of the disaster recovery things. When you look at the things that I have to go through to recover from ransomware, things that I don't have to worry about when I'm talking about traditional disaster recovery, identifying my potential recovery candidates, understanding, are my backups compromised? Not only are my backups encrypted, have I backed up encrypted data or not, but am I impacted by, I've got latent malware sitting out there that even if it's not encrypted, I don't want to go through this whole scenario again in a couple of weeks because I restored an infected machine that hadn't encrypted yet. Do we have sufficient retention on our backup policies? These are all things that we have to start thinking through. Where am I going to restore this to? So, a lot of folks have historically had their recovery environments either in another data center or in a colo, or in some cases up in the public cloud. Where am I going to restore these things to? Do I have to maintain a separate environment that I can run in while I'm cleaning this stuff up? How do I ensure that that environment is completely isolated from my production network? Because the last thing I want to do when I'm going through my validation process is reinfect or further infect the rest of my systems. How do I validate those restore points? Is the data that I've got clean? Is the machine that I've got fully patched against further intrusion? How do I identify those fileless attacks? Is there something that's running in memory in one of these restored systems? How do I know whether or not there's malware there? Once I get all of those things answered, well, then yes, it actually starts to look a lot like regular disaster recovery. I'm going to stage my workloads, and then I'm going to restore them into my production environment eventually. And then, hey, I need to have an audit report on all of this. Not only an audit report that says, hey, these are the steps that you took, and this is what you found, and this is how I restored, and this is what I restored. But when you think about from the beginning, all of this is only as good as being able to test it and understand that it does work, right? So when we start thinking about things like what are the requirements for my cyber my cyber event insurance policies and things like that, well, I have to be able to prove that I've tested it. I have to prove that I've done everything that I can in my power to limit the impact of these events on my organization. And we're seeing an increasingly stringent list of requirements to even get these policies in place. And even when they are in place, if you don't follow the guidelines to a T, we've also seen where they will not pay out. So those are things to keep in mind. How do I test this? Can I test it simply? Or is it going to require a huge lift on the part of my IT departments and my security departments? The National Institute of Standards has really defined ransomware protection in kind of a five component fashion. So you see the blue bubbles on your left, it's identify, protect, detect. Those are the things that when we start thinking about IT security. So your security team is typically the ones that's working on those. That's your antivirus. That's your secure edge solutions. That's your SOC and things like that. How do I manage all of this stuff? The things on the right hand side there, the respond and recover. That's what we're really going to start digging into here a bit more as I start walking further through the presentation. Those are really the responsibility typically of an organization's infrastructure team. And we've seen some interesting discussions in some of our client engagements recently where the security team, when we first start having these conversations, is like, oh, we've got you covered. I'm using this tool and that tool, and we've got a 24/7 SOC. The odds of us getting hit are, unlikely. In the event that we do get hit, we feel that we can limit it down to a scope to where our traditional recovery means are actually going to be sufficient. And it's not infrequent for the director of IT to kind of raise his hand and be like, well, nah, not so fast and not so much. And starts addressing, well, we've got these tools that we need to have in place. It requires this kind of stuff to maintain it. Oh, and by the way, we've got, some bills coming due for updating our hardware in the recovery environment, and on and on and on. So the folks that are actually responsible for that recovery really need to take the lead in driving these discussions, because the security team, while they're involved in the recovery and certainly involved in the validation piece to it, they're at the end of the day not going to be on the hook for bringing things back up and getting your organization back up and functioning. So just be aware of that. So there's a number of things that go into a disaster recovery, an effective approach when it comes down to protecting yourself or at the recovery point. And we honestly feel that the way organizations should be looking at this is, one, can I do it myself? Yes, I can do it myself. And if I'm a large organization with a lot of bodies that I can throw at something, I can cobble together a set of tooling. I can, bring in a lot of my advanced firewalling, and I can bring in a lot of my advanced antivirus, and I can have, I can contract out with various different SOCs to get things monitored, and I can, have a recovery environment, whether it's cloud-based. And if I want to use this cloud scale economics model where I'm only paying for it when it's running, I can probably script that out. I can use Terraform, or I can use whatever scripting tools I want to actually build out that recovery environment on demand. Once you've got all that in place, and building it is hard, but the harder piece to it is actually going to be maintaining it, because once I've got it in place and I've cobbled it together, any updates to the software need to be taken into account. Any updates to my environment, whether it's new applications or networking changes or IP addressing changes or you name it, have to be accounted for in my run books as well as my scripting. And my people have to be familiar with how all those changes have done so that when there is an emergency, they can kind of act on autopilot. But there's nothing that's guided. And this is where we feel that VMware, with their cloud disaster recovery plus ransomware product, have really taken the lead in the market when it comes to protecting or allowing recoverability of a VMware environment. And I'll kind of get into a little bit about the whys of that here in a minute. So we're going to kind of flip and look at what that product looks like from a conceptual standpoint, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper. So when you think about standard disaster recovery, which is where this product kind of initially started to gain traction, I've got a set of VMs. It could be on-prem, it could be in the cloud, that I want to protect. I'm replicating those VMs. I'm taking snapshots, replicating them into a secure data store. So I've got a place where I put my VMs. Once they go in, it's isolated, it's immutable. No one can change them. If I need to restore, I've got a couple different options. And so this is actually based, the restoration environment is actually based on the VMware Cloud on AWS. So I have the capability of either running a lightweight footprint up in VMC on AWS. They call it a pilot light deployment, where it's standing up, it's ready to take workloads. In this scenario, my workload spin up is actually minutes. If I choose to go a little bit more cost effective and kind of take that cloud scale economics approach, it might take me a couple hours to spin up the environment, but still within 2-3 hours, typically I can be up and running and restoring my workloads. Once I've restored those workloads, I validate them, and then I recover back to production. That's standard disaster recovery. From a malware perspective, changes a little bit. So the same type thing, I've still got my immutable air gap storage, but again, I can certainly back up malware. I can certainly back up encrypted data. So there's tooling that needs to go in place to ensure that if I'm looking at potential recovery candidates, I need to understand what are the most likely and most recent clean copies that I can use, and then I have to have a way to validate that. So I have a ransomware event. The tooling here inside DCDR actually gives me a very streamlined and guided function for going through this whole scenario. In a little bit, I'm going to show some screenshots that will kind of show you what the tools look like and how they actually function. But it's a dedicated workflow that I've already set up. I've got run books that are already set up, and they allow my people to kind of work on autopilot. In an emergency, the last thing you want to do is have to think about it. I'm looking to see whether Claire Finkenbinder is on this call. He is. Claire's got Claire is my direct supervisor. Claire's got a statement that, don't let an impacting event become a resume generating event. And if you're not operating in a fashion where you're on autopilot and you're working off of muscle memory, very often you can make things worse before they get better. So once I've done this, I can go through, I've got an isolated environment. I have the ability to go through and validate that my machines are clean. I can keep them completely isolated from my production network while still giving them a network access. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I walk through why that's important here in a minute. Once I've validated that my machines are clean, I can then stage them. I can let them run in my cloud environment while I'm waiting for all the forensics to complete in my production environment, if that's necessary, and then I can recover them. And I can do so in rapid iterations. I can also do so in a multi-threaded fashion. So I can have multiple people working together on these restores. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to restore a full backup set and then have to figure out what's good, what's not. I can have multiple people working on multiple snapshots of multiple different workloads, and they can see what each other are doing, so they're not duplicating effort. So when we think about what this looks like versus what a build your own looks like, so in a build your own, the isolated recovery environment, and I don't want to underestimate this because this is probably the biggest cost to an IT organization when it comes to protecting yourself against ransomware. Having that isolated recovery environment, both from a whether it's physical or whether it's a cloud environment, as well as the time required to script out getting that recovery environment stood up, integrated into your network to where you can access it and start working with it. Build your own, you're doing it. You're doing all of it. It's from scratch. On the VCDR side of things, it's a fully managed IRE. So you don't have to actually manage any of the underlying infrastructure. If you're leveraging VCDR, all of those recovery workbooks have been built out previously. Scanning my offline backups. It's great for looking for the file signatures we're looking for. It doesn't do much for things that are in memory or disguising themselves in system files. You need to have the ability to run that next generation of ransomware with the AI ML capabilities to take a look at the behavioral aspects of the machine once it's up and running in that recovery environment. When I build it myself, it's typically disconnected in a manual experience. I've got tools that I'm pulling from various different vendors. They may or may not be partnering together. They may or may not have done any design work together. When I'm looking at the VCDR solution, it's all streamlined. When you walk through it, the pieces kind of fit together like a puzzle. It was designed to work that way. And finally, it's a slow process to iterate and evaluate snapshots or backups if I'm doing it manually. It tends to be very single-threaded, and it's very difficult to share your work with others. So, if I'm thinking about a scenario where I've got an impact, if I can have all hands on deck and maybe I've got 10 people in my IT department working together, it's going to be a lot quicker than having a couple backup admins and a couple of your application folks going through manually to try to validate this stuff. And the reason why the VMware solution works this way is because VMware owns the entire stack. They're leveraging the capabilities from a Carbon Black Cloud perspective for the advanced antivirus perspective protection. They've got NSX providing that robust network segmentation, the ability to encapsulate a single workload or a set of workloads together in a very efficient fashion. And then it's all based on VMware Cloud on top of AWS, which is actually my recovery environment. So that all of that is kind of in a big wrapper and that gets provided with the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. I'm going to walk through what this looks like here in a second and kind of call out where each of these pieces come into play. And I think you'll see how they were actually designed to work together as opposed to someone just cobbling them together. So we walk through this workflow. So the first thing I'm going to do when I set up my environment. So I've subscribed to disaster recovery with ransomware protection. The first thing I do is I go through and I create protection groups, protection schedules where I say this set of machines is going to have, and then usually I'll group them together. So applications that work together, hey, maybe this database server and this cloud front end or this web front end, they need to be restored together, group them together. You can do that either by machine name, you can do it by hashtags, a number of different ways that you can group these machines together. It's a pretty flexible tool in that fashion. And I say, hey, this is what I want the protection schemes to look like. I want to be taking snapshots every X number of hours of these particular machines. I want to take them weekly, maybe on the weekend. I only want to take it once every 8 hours or something like that, depending on my business requirements. I set up what my retention policies are. How long do I want to keep these? And maybe I want to keep the weeklies for a month, and then maybe I take a monthly good, so I know I've got a monthly good. Maybe I keep that for an additional 6 months, something along those lines that will give me the ability to go back and iterate through and step in time. I then create another set of policies, and these are my recovery policies. So these are the machines that work together on the recovery side of things. These are, I can set up things where it's either fully automated. When I click go, it's just going to run through a recovery, or I can set up manual intervention points that says maybe I want to restore these machines together, but when I hit that database server, I'm going to put a pause in, and I'm not going to continue my recovery until my DBA has gone in and validated that he's seeing or she's seeing what is expected in that database. It's up, it's clean, there's no corruption, I've got what I need. And then once they submit their notes, go, then the automation continues. So it's very flexible in that aspect. So once I've done that, so once I set up my protection schedules, I'm copying things all over into the isolated data store. So you see that VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery Cloud in the middle. That basically shows my isolated data store. So in the event that I have a malware attack, I can do a live mount into my isolated recovery environment. Again, if I'm running a pilot light, I can start working on that immediately because I've already got resources and compute memory storage available to me to start the recovery. If I'm doing a on demand, because again, it's a bit more cost effective to do it that way, I'm sacrificing costs for time. 2-3 hours, I'm up and running, ready to actually start my recovery. I've got a set of tools that allows me to start working through my workloads to determine where do I even begin this process of restoring. So we've got a guided restore point tool. And what this is doing is as it's taking snapshots of your data during your production hours, you've got 3 sections there. You see the snapshots where I've got the bubbles. And what you'll see is over here, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but I've got a bunch of bubbles that are grouped together. So those are those are my once an hour snapshots. And then I've got weekly snapshots that are kind of the more spaced out. And then I've got monthlies and on based on my retention rates. As I'm doing that, I'm monitoring the change rate of that data. So, how much data is changing in my environment over time. And I'm also measuring the entropy. Now, the way they're looking at entropy in this particular scenario is they're looking at what is the compressibility and deduplication aspects of that set of data. So for those that have been in this business for a while, if you encrypt data, typically the encryption tools make it so snapshotting tools, recovery tool, or backup tools can't see the amount of white space in that particular data set. So compression is virtually nil. And because I can't see the individual bits, deduplication also virtually nil. So I can see that change rate. So in this scenario, I'm going along and I'm looking, where do I start my recovery? Well, I see a large change rate and a large entropy spike in this particular instance. So I know, hey, that's probably my encryption event, right? So I know that more likely than not, unless I inspected something, unless I installed a new encryption tool in my environment, and usually you're going to know that, or I've had a large a data upload, that's probably my event. All right, so where would I want to start my recoveries? Well, that snapshot there looks like it's probably the logical point. But you've got to remember that just because the encryption event started there doesn't mean that's when the infection started. So when we're looking through the various different options here, anything that's closer to that encryption point is higher risk from it's actually infected. It may not be encrypted, but it's actually infected. But the further out I go, probably more likely to be clean, but I'm going to experience more data loss at the other end of it. And this tool allows me to kind of go through and make a guided selection as to where I want to start. And I'll talk a little bit about how we deal with kind of that data loss piece to it here in a second, because the tool actually provides some pretty robust capabilities in that particular aspect as well. Once I pick the snapshot I want to start from, I say, hey, start my VM in recovery. The first thing it does when I bring a VM into the recovery environment is it spins it up. It's isolated. So it's leveraging, remember I talked about NSX and Carbon Black. It's leveraging NSX to ring fence this in my recovery environment. So I basically come in and I'm quarantined off. There's no network access other than allowing the tools themselves to install. I insert the Carbon Black sensors, also VMware product, into my recovery environment. This is included in the product. So even if you as a customer are not a Carbon Black customer in your production environment, you can leverage these tools in your recovery environment to walk through and validate the recovery candidates. So it begins 3 particular scans when you install this. So one, it's looking for unpatched software. So it's going through its list of known CVE announcements. It's going through looking at all the Microsoft patching, all of the various different application patching, saying, hey, you're vulnerable here, here, and here. It will give you severity levels that will say, hey, this one's critical, this one's maybe moderate, and it gives you the ability to patch that right in the tooling itself. It also starts looking, it does a file-based scan, so your traditional antivirus. Do I have bad files in here? If so, it'll allow you to clean them up. Then it starts kicking into the behavioral analysis, which is where I think this thing really shines, because it starts to look for behavior that would indicate that I've got something going on from a fileless perspective. So, in this case, let's say, hey, this pops up and says, oh, you've got some stuff going on here. There's a virus here. I can very quickly go back to my list of snapshots and pick a new one if I can't clean it up. So I can pick a new one. I can start over again. And then I can start opening up. I can go in here and start. I can flag it. I can say, hey, this one's no good. So everybody else who's working in this same thread with me can see, hey, Greg looked at copy 6. We know copy 6 is bad. We have to go back older than that. But I can run the further recoverability or vulnerability analysis. And I can do things like change my networking settings. And this is important. So when I come into my environment, remember, fileless is usually detected from behavioral things. So with a single click of the button, when I first start this, I'm in a quarantined analysis. So that just lets me put the tools on and start doing some of the analysis. Once I've got this set up, maybe I want to open up the external outbound. And when I say open up external outbound, I'm going to make it look like it's externally open. So the machine itself is going to say, hey, I've got internet access. I don't necessarily have internet access, but I can start looking to see, is this machine trying to phone home to a foreign country? Is it looking for instructions from somewhere? If not, if it's not doing anything that I would expect weird, maybe I want to open up the internal networking to where I open up that cross network. So it thinks, hey, I've got access to my peers. Is that machine looking to reach out to its peers that I'm not expecting it to try to install things? I can take a look at that behavior. All of these things could indicate that I've actually got a fireless version of malware on my system. Finally, I can open it up basically just open up all the windows and the doors, and let's just make sure this is doing what I expect it to do. Once it's doing what I expect it to do, then I can start looking at, all right, remember if I had to go back, 3-4 weeks, I don't want to lose 3-4 weeks of data. And just because my machine has malware on it that could encrypt that data going forward does not necessarily mean that the data in that machine is compromised. So I can then use the tooling provided to go in and do a guest file restore. So I can go in to one of the copies that maybe it had some malware on it, and I can say, I want this database file, and I want these files out of this document store, and this, that, and the other, and I can restore it to where I can come up with the most complete possible data set for when I go back into production. So they provide this by default in the tooling to allow me the most robust possible recovery point that I can come up with. Once I've done that, I can basically go through. Actually, I missed one. You can go back here. You set your badge. So setting a badge is basically saying, hey, this is a good recovery point. I've gone through. I've validated that there's no malware on this. I've gone through and I've restored all the files that I want to restore. It's good. Everybody that's working on the recovery can see that I've noted this one is good. From there, I can power off and stage it for recovery. I can take a new snapshot. So basically what it does is it takes a snapshot of my new known good. It puts it in that immutable data store. So now I've got a copy that I know it's not encrypted. I know it's not infected. It's got a complete data set as of now. So I can kind of start from stage one with my new protection schema from there. Once I've got that all set up, I can then either run it in VMC if I need to while I'm working through forensics in my production environment, if that's required, or I can restore it back into my production environment with as much data as I can possibly come up with. And again, it's a orchestrated process, so it's not like you're trying to figure out. You step through these in stages, so it's very difficult to get. It's hard to overthink it. Let's just put it that way. You can walk through, and there's a very robust set of tooling that walk you through what you need to do to make sure that you can recover. So essentially, you've got your uninfected and curated VMs, and then I can restore those back into my production environment once I'm clean. And the things that I want you to really take away from this are that from a ransomware threat perspective, the threat continues to evolve. It continues to evolve, getting more complex when it comes to attack vectors, more complex when it comes to attack tooling, but it's actually you're getting more and more people, bad actors, that are capable of using these tools because of the as a service model. Traditional high availability DR backup, it's really not sufficient to protect you. Could you simply say, yeah, I can restore, if I restore an old enough copy, I'll get an unencrypted copy? Yes, but can your organization afford to lose that much data? And what is the impact to you and your customers should that happen? Do it yourself? Yes, it can be done, but it isn't a small undertaking. It's something that it's very labor intensive, and you really need to have a full team that is dedicated to doing just that if you choose to take that route. And finally, from Summit's perspective, VCDR plus ransomware really provides that disaster recovery as a service model in a very, very efficient manner from both a process and tooling perspective, but also from an economics perspective. When you think about what you get from cloud typically, right? So cloud is not always the least expensive option. It's not always the most cost efficient, but it allows you to have that agility. Well, in the case of disaster recovery, VCDR actually is very compelling from a price point. You will probably save money by doing it this way versus growing your own or even using some of the partnership type offerings that are out there on the market today. Even just looking at the gear itself, the hardware you would need to set up something like this, the fact that I can do this in an on-demand fashion and I only have to pay for it when I'm doing my recovery or when I'm doing my testing, which brings me to testing. This is probably the easiest test button for disaster recovery that I've seen ever, whether it's standard disaster recovery or otherwise. Excuse me. They've got push button testing that is non-disruptive to your productive workloads, non-disruptive to the snapshots that you're taking. When I'm running through my testing, I've got full audit trails so that when I have an event, I can actually prove to my insurance folks and whoever else wants to look at it, whether it's the regulatory bodies or whatever, that I've run through full testing matrices and that they worked, so that I can get those payouts, so that I can meet the requirements when I had to disclose and things like that. Very, very elegant, very, very complete tool. At the end of the day, I've got a pretty quick call to action. One, as I mentioned, the ransomware recovery maturity assessment. So the URL you see on your screen here today, this is a tool that's about 20 to 30 minutes to go through and fill out all of the questions. The more honest you are with the answers, the better the end result will be. I know I'm a big one where I like to fudge my numbers and make myself look good. Don't do that with this. Be bluntly honest in this tool. And it will give you a very nice synopsis of where you stand from a recovery maturity matrix. Engage with us. If you've got some questions about what you saw today, or you want to do a deeper dive into the VCDR tooling or things like that, the emails that I showed at the very first of the presentation, please feel free to email us. There's a URL here, thesummitgroup.com/contact us. You can fill out that form and we will be happy to reach out and engage with you. And most importantly, regardless of whether you engage with us or regardless of whether or not you want to do VCDR, prepare. This is not something that is an if question. This is a when question. So be ready when, in the event that you have one of these attacks, that you can recover as quickly as possible. And that's what I've got for you today. You're on mute, Jill.
There we go. Thank you. Hey folks, anyone have any questions or anything before we call it an afternoon, before we wrap this up? Oh, we do have a question coming in. What is the tooling that's from?
So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So give me a second. It's came in from JD. So you've got, I guess, is the question
I think I
around how
understand
it
what he's.
logs it? So I mean, you've got a full log trail, full audit trail. So as it's taking the snapshots, all of that is logged and able to be reported against. So I don't, is that what you're looking for there?
I think he's asking, can you do both at the same time? Can you actually do the recovery? Because a lot of times the insurance companies have to do the forensic analysis.
Yeah, so it's, I
first.
mean, it's logging. It's, as you go through the recovery, it's logging that, right? And remember, you're doing the recovery of snapshots of the environment, and those snapshots aren't going away. So just because I mark something, if they want to get a copy of the snapshot and dig into it further to try to figure out what this actually is, that's going to be available as well. But as you go through the restore process itself, every person that clicks on that file is logged, and it will go through essentially chain of custody. I think that's what you're asking. If you want to shoot me an email, we can have a bit more discussion around that, because I want to make sure I fully understand, and I'm not sure that I do. And Claire, I know you're on the call and you're muted, but does that, and from a banking perspective, so just so everybody knows, Claire actually was the CIO of a bank prior. Does that make sense? Can you provide any more information on what you think he's asking there, Claire? Because I'd love to answer his question if I can.
Yeah, I need to look at do I see the question in the chat session, guys? I didn't see it.
It's in the
Q&A.
Q&A. If you click on the Q&A
Oh,
button.
I'm sorry. Let me bring that up.
Yeah.
Okay, how does the tool look like from VMware Works that keeps accurate chain of custody backups required by forensic legal while still being able to recover quickly? But an incident occurred, make sure. Well, the backups are going to be secured within your own tenant, right? And they're also going to be enumerated in air gaps, so you'll be able to keep that, isolation and proof of, quality in place, as well as we mentioned also, there's two different things here when it comes from an auditing perspective. Number one, the tool itself does a continuous audit to ensure that it's in a functional state. So you can pretty much, you'll have a log and so forth available to you on a reoccurring basis that passes sniff test, passes sniff test, passes sniff test. If something were to break there, the tool is going to let you know. So that's number one. And then number two, any of the tests that you do conduct or any of the recoveries you do conduct, it provides you a full audited trail of that aspect. So for myself, when I saw this tool for the very first time as an ex-CIO director of bank operations, I saw the logging and details that it had from that perspective as a godsend, because instead of actually having someone to manually document things or pull logs from multiple systems, I had a one-stop shop that I can now export things out and give to my auditors or my regulators to satisfy those needs. So hopefully that answers the question, and if it doesn't, we can actually set up a separate call to address those as needed.
Yeah, And please send me an email if that didn't answer your question. gcolburn@thesummitgrp.com. And I'm very, very happy to have this conversation in more depth with you. Anybody else?
I don't see anything else coming in. Well, thanks everyone. And links have been provided, and we look forward to reaching out and catching up with everyone. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.